Good evening. Welcome to the Institute's annual spring benefit. We are Doctors Brenda and David Solomon, faculty at the Chicago Psychoanalytic Institute. We are co-chairs of tonight's event and delighted to be your MCs, especially tonight as we collectively move through this age of COVID-19. Acutely aware of what has been absent in our lives this pandemic, we learned from this experience that survival is related to our ability to adapt to change. This is also true for the Institute. Brenda and I have been connected to the Institute since the early 1970s, when we were both candidates in the psychoanalytic education program. I know we don't look like it. When we made a decision to go to the Institute, it was more than just learning a discipline. It changed and created a different way of being for the rest of your life.
Beginning in the old days, a group of analysts interviewed me for acceptance and even assigned me to a training analyst. Those days long gone. How both the Institute and I have changed and developed since then is quite impressive. Not only did I receive an outstanding education, but with the Institute's support in the 1980s, I became the local point person for TV and newspapers. That allowed me to teach how psychoanalytic principles could be applied to not just patients, but also the larger community. As all on our faculty, we are committed to lifetime learning, teaching, and creativity. In the 1970s, there were few women analytic candidates. As a newly graduated analyst, by default, not because I was a philosopher, but because I was one of the few younger women at the Institute, they drafted me to co-teach one of the first required ethic courses in the country. That course propelled me to learn and to meet the young analytic candidates who inspired me, both then and now. Today, we are reaching a more diverse group of candidates who will bring analytic understanding to even newer communities. Tonight is my opportunity to try and motivate my virtual audience, you out there, to contribute to this institute, a precious resource. We've all been struggling with changes associated with the pandemic, and it brought out the best of many who have reached out to help others.
Tonight, we want your ears to listen especially carefully, for here's the lineup for tonight. Grab your favorite beverage, sit back, or better yet, lean in. Tonight, you will hear the story of our treatment center's child and adolescent programs. All monies raised tonight will be earmarked directly for those programs. We ask you to open up your philanthropic hearts, dig deep, and support the center.
Throughout the evening, you can use your smartphone to donate via text message. It's easy. Just follow the info on your screen, or wait until the end and click the donation link. Tonight, we will also honor special people whose vision and philanthropy have helped the Institute build the foundation to help children most in need. Lastly, we are delighted to have as our speaker tonight, Alex Kotlowitz, who collects and relays stories of people living and working in some of Chicago's most abandoned neighborhoods.
It's no accident that we chose to host this event on the 165th birthday of Dr. Sigmund Freud. Throughout this evening, we will partake of a special birthday cake shared in honor of Freud and this special celebration.
Now we are honored to bring to the digital stage Erica Schmidt, president of the Chicago Psychoanalytic Institute, who was elected as our first female president, as well as the first child psychoanalyst and the first social worker to be elected president. Since 2013, Erica has led the Institute with confidence. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you, Brenda and David, for hosting this evening and for your many contributions to the Institute over the years. This evening, we come together on Sigmund Freud's 165th birthday. Psychoanalysis has evolved considerably since Freud founded it around 1895, and this evening you'll hear about some of the ways we now use psychoanalytic ideas differently and very creatively. But one of the things that has not changed relates to our theme for this evening, a place to tell their stories. From the beginning, Freud recognized the importance of stories. In 1895, in his first book of published cases, Freud told the story of a young woman, Elizabeth von R., suffering from paralysis, which he uncovered to be related to her love for her father. Reflecting on his devotion to science, he wrote, "It still strikes me as strange that the case histories I write should read like short stories." But, he goes on to say, his efforts to understand the mind bring him closer to the, quote, works of imaginative writers, unquote. We now want to honor 2 faculty members with an Outstanding Faculty Service Award. They both went above and beyond to help others during the pandemic. My first story is about Dr. Dorothy Grunis. Prior to becoming a psychoanalyst, she studied Shakespearean and Jacobean drama, speaking of stories, and then biochemistry and genetics before attending medical school. Dorothy graduated from the analytic training program here at the Institute and has been on the faculty now for a number of years. As the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines first looked promising and then were approved for use, and then healthcare workers became eligible for them, Dorothy mobilized the entire Institute community to get vaccinated. She ensured that all faculty, staff, clinic therapists, and board members knew how to get access to the vaccine. She alerted everyone as sites became available, and she walked those who needed help signing up through the process. Then she reached out to everyone to make sure that they had been vaccinated. For weeks, we received hundreds of emails showing Dorothy hard at work on behalf of the safety of the Institute community. Congratulations, Dorothy, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica. I grew up at the Institute for Psychoanalysis, next door to Dr. Hoyt to be exact. To this day, Dr. Turman, remembering me tagging along in my brother's carpool, still calls me Baby Dorothy. When I walk through the hallways, I see Marion Tolpin, and Paul too. If I listen closely, I still hear Bert Kohler talking about authentic affect, and I remember Tom Pappas dancing with Hershey at a benefit 20 years ago. Every day I use what I learned from supervision with Kenny Newman. I remember so many others who have died. Think of Saul Siegel and of Max Forman. I attended Jack Buffington's 50th birthday some 40 years ago. I still see Arnie Goldberg in the library reciting Yeats, Things Fall Apart, The Center Cannot Hold, John Ghetto and The Vertical Split. At the same time, I remember his garden where I'd play hooky from grade school. In the library, I still hear Jerry Weiner reciting Shakespeare and Jerry Kafka debating with me the merits of other literary figures. And despite his protestations that residency was over, I never did call Dr. Krasner Ron. Sam Weiss was sick only 6 days and died of COVID 4 days before his vaccine appointment, despite his daughter's vigilance to keep him and his wife safe. The government initially said all residents of Illinois 65 and older would be vaccinated in their nursing homes, suggesting we no longer live in the community once we reach 65. After spending probably 600 hours on the phone with various politicians and organizations, I reached the Illinois Department of Public Health. They asked me, "What is psychoanalysis?" I explained that the Institute is one of the oldest mental health care organizations in the state, founded in 1932 by Franz Alexander. Historically, we were affiliated with the University of Chicago, Rush, and Michael Reese, but currently we are independent. I shared the work we do in our consulting rooms, clinics, and community outreach. They listened and insisted we are essential healthcare workers, and we and all who help make our work possible should be vaccinated immediately. My father explained that the sense of self is crucial and vulnerabilities to disruption must be constantly guarded against. This, he said, was true of all of us, but more so among older adults who suffered disruptions to their historic self as colleagues, friends, and witnesses of their lives begin to disappear. To date, only 50% of Americans over 65 have been vaccinated, and a group that accounts for 81% of COVID mortalities. I want to thank all of you. This was a project of love, and special thanks to Don, Suzanne, Evelina, Scott, and Dennis for helping ensure no one was excluded. My father would be disappointed in America's reaction to COVID-19. Civilization, he would say, is defined by how cultures treat their most vulnerable populations. And by this definition, we can no longer consider ourselves civilized. I know he'd be pleased that the Illinois Department of Public Health considers psychoanalysis essential health care, and that 200 of us, our therapists, analysts, and those who make it possible for us to do our work are safely vaccinated. I'm humbled by this recognition. Thank you.
My next story is about Dr. Phil Levitz. Phil is a training and supervising analyst, has served as institute director, and has taught the Assessment of Change course for many years. As the pandemic unfolded, we all observed the valor of frontline and essential workers and could also see that they might be traumatized as they were working with patients ill with COVID under incredibly stressful conditions. Knowing that prompt access to mental health services with as few barriers as possible makes a big difference, Phil conceived of a simple but effective intervention project. With the expertise of volunteer institute faculty, the Frontline Responders Project offers 8 sessions of pro bono mental health care to intervene quickly and to support those providing critical services during this pandemic emergency. Phil organized the faculty volunteers and has shepherded the project since it started almost 1 year ago. We are grateful for Phil's initiative and with appreciation give him the Outstanding Faculty Service Award. Congratulations and thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Erica. Several influences in my early life instilled in me an interest in contributing to the community. Apart from being a movie theater, one of my dad's movie houses in Memphis became a place where the local community gathered. One of my mother's heroes was the rabbi who participated in sit-ins during the early 1960s in Memphis, my hometown. Finding ways to expand on this foundation has long been part of me. This project could only achieve what it has to date because of the psychoanalytic community that made it possible. To the 33 faculty who offered themselves as consultants and therapists for the over 40 who sought help from us, my heartfelt gratitude plucks my heart each time I view what has been done. I offer a quote from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night to try to capture the passion of my thinks. My kind Antonio, I can no other answer make but thanks, and ever thanks, and oft good turns are shuffled off with such uncurrent pay. In a similar fashion, I could only appeal to my colleagues to give of themselves, which they did most graciously. They embodied altruism, a level of maturity recognized by Kohut as one of the highest developmental achievements. Gandhi has an apt quote that reflects the essence of altruism. Analysis provides us with a journey to reach that as we reflect upon ourselves while being analyzed. Gandhi said, "The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others." Being offered this recognition was an unexpected reward for something that seemed only natural for psychoanalysts to try to provide for a community in distress. I'm deeply moved to accept it and to say how affectionately I can refer to my colleagues who participated in this endeavor.
My next story is about the Institute's treatment center, which is comprised of our adult clinic, our child and adolescent clinic, and our child grief services. We have been working over the past several years to integrate these three services into the one treatment center we are celebrating this evening. To provide the best services possible, we created a new role, Treatment Center Director, and are very pleased to welcome Hillary Gimple-Wolfe as the first person to hold this important position. Please remember that all donations this evening will go to support the work of the treatment center. Tonight's honorees, Paul, Joni, and Campbell Holinger, and Bill and Joan Dutton, are the people who have made the child and adolescent clinical services possible. It all began with a gleam in Paul Hollinger's eye, a gleam shared by Joni and Campbell. Now, to ensure its growth, they have created an endowment fund that will provide ongoing support. Paul, whose sensibility combines psychoanalysis with his background in public health, recognized just how critical it is to provide depth psychoanalytic therapy to children as their problems emerge, rather than wait until these problems become entrenched and take children off the developmental pathway. He also recognized that depth psychoanalytic therapy is rare and difficult to access for some of the children who need it the most. Enter Bill and Joan Dutton. Paul shared his idea with Bill and Joan, who immediately understood the critical need for such services and contributed a generous lead gift to make it possible. Their idea was that all children should have access to high-quality mental health services regardless of their family's financial resources. This is the clinic's mission. It is carried out in clinic offices, in school settings that make services readily available to students, and in other settings as well. It may be traditional therapy, it may be groups, it may be teacher or parent consultation, it could be a number of other activities that promote psychological growth and development. What has been so special about Bill and Joan is their steadfast, quiet, but firm moral support of this mission. This mission takes many forms, and I want to tell you a story about one way it happened. Bruce Thomas, who you will hear from soon, invited me to accompany him to a school where he was volunteering. The kindergarten teacher had asked Bruce to tutor a child in her classroom. This boy was new to the school, did not communicate, did not participate in classroom activities, and occasionally erupted in impulsive, violent behavior. He might throw a chair across the classroom. Bruce was his tutor, and I was his psychoanalytic consultant. Bruce thought he would begin to help M learn the alphabet. M, however, had absolutely no interest in this or any other activity, and it was only with persistence that Bruce gradually engaged M in playing with an old manual typewriter. It was painstakingly gradual, but without interest or curiosity, M would never learn in school. Bruce kept at it. One day, Bruce told me Em and he were playing with a wagon in the hallway, and Bruce heard an unfamiliar sound. It was Em, laughing with pleasure. Bruce had not heard this before. And then, one day, Bruce called me in a panic. "I've ruined things with Em," he said. "It's all over." Bruce and I sat down to talk. He told me that suddenly and with no warning, M struck him on the face and told him, "You're not my friend anymore. I'm never coming back." Now, as a psychoanalyst, I knew that this meant Bruce was indeed his friend and had become an important person in M's life. And M was now scared by his growing attachment to Bruce. "What am I going to do?" Bruce asked. I said, "You're going to pick up M next week for his tutoring session and go on." Bruce was surprised by this, but quickly understood. They continued to the end of the school year, and M was starting to learn in the classroom. The kindergarten had an end-of-the-year graduation ceremony. Each student stood, stated their name, and told what they hoped to be when they grew up. Most of the kids in the class wanted to be a policeman or a singer or a teacher. M stood up and said, "My name is M, and when I grow up, I want to be a grown-up man." This is one example of the many creative ways that the psychoanalytic clinicians and volunteers in our clinics help children of our under-resourced communities. Paul, Joni, Campbell, Bill, and Joan, on behalf of all of the children we have been able to help because of your generosity, thank you for this enduring legacy.
Erica, thank you so much for this honor, and thanks also to the Institute. We appreciate this tribute very much.
We want to thank Paul as well, who inspired us to help establish a child and adolescent psychotherapy clinic. Paul will be honored along with his wife, Joni, and son, Campbell, in a few minutes. Thank you, Joni and Campbell.
I've been associated with the Institute for a long time. I'm a strong believer in the efficacy of psychodynamic therapy. I think the analysts and other therapists at the Institute have a deep knowledge of how the mind works and how to address and alleviate emotional suffering. In talking with Paul, it became clear to us that so many children who need psychotherapy lack access to help.
We wanted very much to do something to address this problem. This inspired us to give seed money to start a needs-based clinic. We knew there would be no better place than the Institute for the children to get superb therapy.
The clinic was overseen by Erica for several years. Denia Barrett then became the director. We also want to acknowledge and thank Denia. Erica and Denia are compassionate and dedicated psychoanalysts. We got to know many of the child therapists in the clinic over the years and are tremendously impressed as well by their knowledge, compassion, and dedication to the children. We know the therapists of the clinic have changed the lives of so many children for the better.
We were interested in funding the clinic because we believe in the power of psychoanalytic psychotherapy to treat emotional problems and thereby improve lives. Left untreated, emotional problems can harden over time and lead to undesirable lifelong behavior patterns. Individuals and their families can be negatively impacted for a lifetime.
We believe that good talk therapy can be an intervention of sorts, which brings psychological change and the prospect of breaking such behavior patterns. And successful psychological change is more likely to happen at a young age, when one is more adaptable.
With the help of our skilled clinic therapists, children and adolescents can work to identify the root causes of emotional problems. This process can lead to improved mental health and a more successful life. It can also produce the psychological skills to better navigate the world going forward. We know such change has taken place with many children and adolescents since the clinic's founding in 2008. For their work in making this happen, we thank Paul, Erica, Denia, Harriet, Eileen, and the other clinic therapists.
Good evening, friends. Joni, Campbell, and I are very humbled and grateful to be here with you tonight. You are the ones responsible for the Institute's great strides in child initiatives and the treatment center. We are so appreciative of Joan and Bill Dutton's remarkable work. We very much want to thank Erica and Bob, along with the board, the therapists, the staff, the faculty, and our Institute students for all their roles in enhancing child and adolescent treatment and training. Child work involves both treatment and prevention. We have a long way to go, but we're making progress. Over 100 countries have prohibited physical punishment in schools, and 62 countries have banned physical punishment in all settings. However, stunningly, 19 states in the USA still allow physical punishment in the schools. Fortunately, there's currently legislation in Congress which would prohibit the practice of physical punishment in any school which receives federal funding. In addition, the House recently passed legislation to strengthen the child abuse prevention law, so there is progress. Future possibilities to pursue, maybe closer to home? How about a scholarship program to help analytic candidates get child and adolescent training? Or linking up with a local public high school to award scholarships for post-high school education, perhaps the first such education in their family? In closing, you're the ones who make this institute possible. The progress in child treatment and education over the past years is stellar, and we so look forward to what is yet to come. We love you, and we thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce you to Tina Louie. Tina is a therapist who has been working with our Englewood Project since 2013. This is a project which provides group work services to Southside children who have been exposed to violence. Maintaining relationships and continuity with children we typically work with in schools has been a real challenge during the pandemic. Tina's work exemplifies the persistence of our therapists who know how important this continuity is, and it also exemplifies the creativity of our therapists in finding ways to stay involved and engaged. We look forward to hearing your story, Tina.
Thank you so much, Erica. The Englewood Project is based in elementary schools in CPS, and students are referred to us because they've been exposed to community violence or they've had difficulties with behaviors during classroom instruction. I started in 2013 and have had a number of groups ranging from second graders to 8th graders. And we have had so many kids come through who take the time during lunch or their prep time to really address their social and emotional learning. And we do small groups so they can figure out how to interact with each other and how to kind of find space to identify their emotions or their feelings so that they can then go out into their own community. One of my newest groups involve second grade girls, which I started about 3 years ago. And there's this one particular girl who was referred to us because she had been sent out of the classroom quite often for outbursts in classroom. She couldn't control her fidgeting in her seats. And so she was often put into the hallways to think about how to interact with other students. So she was referred to our second grade girls group. It's now been 3 years, and during that time period, she has had quite a turnaround. Any slightest mishap, she was always in fights with other girls. That was always translated into the group. And we found a way to identify all of those angry behaviors as a black hole. So she has used that term, a black hole of anger, and whenever we would check in with each other or whenever we would have small groups, we would talk about this black hole of anger and what expanded it, or if we could do anything to shrink that hole to where it was not a black hole anymore. And this was, I guess, a theme that we worked with for 2 or 3 years. And she says that she doesn't have a black hole anymore. She has come to really value the small space that group provides for her. Whenever she comes to group, she is constantly reminding the other members that group is important. It is a safe space for her to share emotions, that we talk about feelings, and we figure out what can be done so that we don't repeat those things outside of group. She has become a leader, she's become a self-advocate, and she constantly reminds her teachers, and it's a way of reminding herself that group and this safe space is important.
Thank you to all our honorees this evening, and thank you, Tina. Tina so beautifully described the acute impact of the treatment center. Let's give Tina, our award winners, and Erica some applause in the chat. Once again, I'd like to emphasize all the monies raised tonight will go directly to these programs. You can donate via text message now. Look for the number below, or click on the donation link at the end of the program.
If you haven't yet, now is the moment to refill your drink and turn up the volume. I am pleased to welcome Alex Kotlowitz, award-winning author, in discussion with the treatment center's own Bruce Thomas. Alex tells stories from the heart of America, deeply intimate tales of struggle and perseverance. He will be in conversation with Bruce Thomas, a lifelong child advocate and volunteer therapist, in our program called The Holding Circle that he and Erica Schmidt, the Institute's president, began in 2010.
So the theme of this benefit is a place to tell their stories. You've become a remarkable teller of stories. What were the origins of this interest in storytelling? I mean, were you writing stories when you were a child?
So my dad was a novelist. I, of course, am a nonfiction writer, but we shared this love for stories. And I think, through osmosis, I probably acquired some of those storytelling skills from him. I sort of began writing about not only telling stories, but also beginning writing about people who were in one way struggling, if not, and trying to persevere through some really difficult times.
Tell us about the sequence of events that led to There Are No Children Here, and how you met the family.
Sure. I worked as a community organizer. I worked primarily with kids, and it was on the south side of Atlanta, which at the time was the second poorest census tract in the country. And I thought I was pretty savvy about life in America, about what it meant to be poor, what it meant to be black. And I think I was had some of my assumptions upended in my time there. And so that stayed with me, and I got a job of all places at the Wall Street Journal, and I wanted to go back to Atlanta actually to find out, it was 10 years later, to find out what had happened to some of those kids. It wasn't practically possible, so I did the next best thing, which was to go to a public housing project, which was then at the time just a mile and a half from my office, which was then downtown. And it was one of the most distressing communities I had ever been in. And as I came to learn, it had everything to do, again, with this institutional neglect. So this piece was about this young boy who at the time was 12 years old trying to grapple with this daily onslaught of violence. And then I went back and I spent the better part of 2 years. And, the book for me is really about what it means to be growing up poor in the world's wealthiest country. I mean, this kind of physical and spiritual isolation.
How long did it take you to establish a kind of basic trust between yourself and the family?
Right. So with Lafayette and Farrow, to be honest, it was kind of easy, if not immediate. They were young. They were 12 and 9 years old. I walk into their life as, immediately they're concerned. It was hard for them to conceive of the idea that I was working on a book. All they cared about was I going to stay around once I finished the book? And I made a commitment to them that I would.
The director of the Institute, Erica, tells a story about talking with a school principal who expresses some amazement that she keeps coming back. It's not just a promiscuous come in, provide the service and leave. And we've been at this school now for 10 years, and we just keep coming back. In the process of establishing a relationship with the kids and their families, what's the role of empathy? How does that play into it?
Right. Yeah, empathy is, I think of as the centripetal force of storytelling. It's why we tell stories. This capacity to get readers to imagine themselves as someone else. And of course, as a journalist, as a reporter, my challenge is to find empathy with the people I'm writing about. And I want to be very clear when I talk about empathy. I'm not talking about sympathy. I'm not talking about feeling sorry for someone or feeling pity for them. What I am talking about is trying to understand what pushes and pulls at them, what motivates them, not to excuse or justify their actions, but to come to understand them. And empathy too is also, I think, the central force of community. It's what ultimately binds us. And God knows we've been a country lacking in empathy, especially from the very top over the past 4 years.
Indeed.
And it feels to me so essential. And that's the beauty for me of storytelling, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. You read a book and you begin to imagine yourself in the place and the shoes of the people you're reading about.
Do you remember in the early days of getting to know the two boys, any moments that really either really upset you or surprised you?
When I first began spending time there, I would take the two boys, Lafayette and Farrow, out for pizza twice a week. And I remember one day I was, I'd go there and I really, because for me, what kind of really, again, what upended me in my early days at Henry Horner was the violence. And so I would sit down with Lafayette and Farrow and I'd say what had happened over the past week or so. And I remember one time Farrow, the younger of the two boys, starts telling me about a spelling bee, and I'm being a little simplistic here, but I started saying, but was anybody shot or stabbed? And he, as only a 9-year-old boy could be, just was persistent in wanting to tell me about this spelling bee. And I realized at that moment that I hadn't been a particularly good listener, and that as an outsider, and this is, I think, one of the things I've learned over the years, I was drawn to all the things that felt unfamiliar, and was kind of neglecting all the things that we had in common, and Farrow had a love for school, as did I. And so I became much more attentive to that. And in fact, the very opening of the book is this moment with the two boys and a friend of theirs and a cousin hunting for garter snakes in these nearby railroad tracks. Right. And I very purposely opened the book with that moment because it was a moment that at least I, and I hope readers could identify with as well. We all had these places of refuge as kids. And so I learned to become a better listener.
What else did you learn? That experience was extraordinary education, right?
Race plays such a large part in this. Public housing was predominantly, if not almost entirely, African American. That was not by accident. And again, those projects served as a kind of wall for segregation.
Yeah.
It was a way to keep those communities absolutely away, apart from everybody else in the city.
The cumulative effect for me of working with individual kids or teams, sometimes pairs of kids, it completely upended my understanding of educational policy. And there's a basic kind of biblical injunction for me now. Stay in the gravity field of children.
Right.
Because the moment you leave, you get off into other gravity fields.
I think it's really important for us to recognize that in grappling and trying to assist children, we've got to find a way to work with their families. I mean, families is the most important, most essential institution out there. And I feel like it's one of the great paradoxes of this country is that we like to think we're all in this together, and yet we lead such disparate lives. We tend to spend time around the familiar. We live with people who look like us, who think like us, who talk like us. It's going to feel a little contrived, but we've got to find a way to spend time in communities other than our own.
Amen. Yeah. Well, on this point of working with families, you find strong support from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, which has done some really remarkable work, both research and policy development. And they have come down very strongly on the importance of, say, working with mothers as an integral part of working in the schools, and indeed making the mother the primary focus. So but you don't give up, but it's very hard to do. So I agree. I was working with two boys that were fourth graders, and they were on the second floor. I came up to the second floor, and I started to walk down the hall. And the two boys were out in the hallway. And I knew immediately what had happened. What had happened is they gotten themselves thrown out of class. And the reason is something was going on in the class that made them uneasy or frightened or anxious. And they knew exactly what buttons to push with the teacher to get themselves thrown out. It's amazing how kids find ways of navigating their way through school, which can be a anxiety-producing experience.
And that's very much what my recent book, An American Summer, is about, which is about the toll the violence takes on both the spirit of individuals and the spirit of community. And in fact, one of the stories I tell in that book is of a 16-year-old boy, Marcelo, who on the one hand is a member of a street gang, on the other hand is a straight-A student, and he's trying to navigate this tightrope, and a really, really smart kid. And at the age of 16, he gets shot and suffers from profound trauma as a result. And so I spent, the better part of 2 years following Marcelo's journey as he tried to sort of find his way through this morass.
Now, the schools in America today are more segregated than they were, say, in 1960. It's appalling.
And actually, when we talk about the violence, it's not happening within the walls of the schools, it's happening in the neighborhoods. And what happens is, of course, those kids bring all that they're carrying into the school every morning.
Right.
So I feel like that we need to find ways to build on the schools.
Absolutely.
And kind of what you were talking about earlier is thinking about sort of much more holistically. I don't understand why we don't have schools open in the afternoons and evenings for tutoring, for free dinners, for counseling for kids and or their parents. It just seems so intuitive.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
One thing we share is this connection with actual real live children, and how important that is, and what a reciprocal relationship it is, right? Most good programs involving children have to have this quality of improvisation, adaptability, deployment of imagination, right? And fortunately, we have that kind of freedom at the school, and we've managed to assemble a pretty remarkable core group of people that are absolutely dedicated to the children and constantly ready to learn.
Two of the things that we share is, one, we become good listeners, and listening doesn't come easy. At least it doesn't come easy for me. I've had to really work at it, and I've come to recognize that also listening is not this passive art. So there's that, and I think the other part of it is that I share with clinicians is this kind of love for story. And I think what clinicians are doing, and I'm oversimplifying here, is they're, by getting people to tell their own stories, they're helping them make sense of their own narratives, right? Making sense of their own lives. And so for me, it's sort of a listening and then trying to make sense of the journey that they've experienced. And I think that goes the same with clinicians.
You know, it's been a treat to think about what our group has done over the last year, what we hope to do. And it's been wonderful to share stories.
Well, thanks for having me.
What stories of transformation. Thank you both, and thank you all for listening. Now, please consider making a donation to directly support our treatment center's child and adolescent programs. What an evening of stories we've all heard. We've heard stories about how our Institute community, through early access to COVID vaccinations, made it possible to continue to teach and guide students, see patients, and come together to support our frontline responders. Thank you, Dorothy and Phil.
We've heard stories of how the desire to help children and philanthropic hearts create a place to tell their stories. The Treatment Center's Child and Adolescent Program. Thank you to the Hollingers and Duttons for your inspiring dedication.
We've heard from Alex Kotlowitz about people in our most vulnerable communities, reminding us that we are all human beings struggling to develop a sense of self, authenticity, with a desire to be loved, included, successful, and happy.
Bruce Thomas showed us that where there is a safe place to tell your story, you can overcome challenges. Thanks to all of you for listening to these stories, and to those who have donated, thank you. Know you help us continue to provide a place to tell their stories with your gift. We wish you a safe and wonderful evening. Well done, Institute community, and happy birthday, Dr. Sigmund Freud.